It's a time of change for print. It's a time of change for the Dazed group. Dazed and Confused has just gone down to 6 issues a year rather than being a monthly title. And you said recently that the Dazed group, it's now moved from being a print publisher to being a sort of a digital first publisher. Do you think that you're starting to see the end of print magazines, or do you think they're always going to be around?
The idea of the kind of magazine that has the monopoly, that kind of one all-powerful, the Life magazine, the one magazine that has the kind of monopoly on a certain segment of the audience is gone. Those golden days, if you like, kind of are equivalent to kind of the golden years of Hollywood, like they're gone, they're ancient, and now it's super disruptive, loads and loads of publishers coming into the market, loads of different independent voices disrupting the kind of major publishing scene, and I think that's what Dazed represents. It represents that independent spirit, and yeah, print is going to keep surviving. It just keeps morphing, it keeps changing. The types of magazines change, the way that magazines communicate change, but there's still a very, very effective way of reaching people. People love print, especially in magazines which carry a high quality photography. It's really the best way to package photography is in print.
I'm intrigued, when you started Dazed, you talked about it being an independent magazine. You still talk a bit about it as if it is a niche independent magazine, but you, perhaps yourself and Dazed Group, it doesn't operate in an independent way. You're very closely tied to advertising and sort of, you operate commercially.
Independent doesn't mean anarchist. Independent for me means we choose what we do. Nobody tells us what to do.
So your stylists don't shoot full looks for advertisers then?
Of course they do. But I still decide what happens, what goes in, what doesn't. We make all the decisions, That's independence. They can decide how they shoot, what they shoot, when they want to shoot it. The fact that we decide to shoot a full look for an advertiser is a decision we make, but it's our decision to make. It's not there's no imposed condition on the magazine of what we should do and how we should behave. We discuss it, we do it, we execute it, and we're proud of it. And if advertisers take the piss, we tell them to fuck off. It's a dialogue. You're in a dialogue with your reader, and you're in a dialogue with your advertiser. And you sit in the middle. That's what magazines have always done.
But that must have changed for you, just even
balance it.
Now, you're so much more sort of, I guess, kind of respected and known than you were when you started out. You're seen as a very important person in terms of acting as a creative consultant, helping brands with stuff. I'm interested in how you found that balance.
And I used to phone people up and say I was from Dazed Confused. They used to laugh and say, yeah, we feel the same. And now at least when I say I'm from Dazed Confused, people know what the hell I'm talking about. But it took at least 10 years to reach that point.
I want to go back and ask about you as a person and sort of you starting out, because you had quite an interesting upbringing, especially an early upbringing. You moved around a lot. Do you remember sort of when fashion or style first came into your consciousness?
Yeah, music. Music was what brought fashion and style to me. Punk, glam rock. I wasn't, that was the first time I discovered. That makes me sound really old, right? It makes me sound like I'm like, it should be in my 60s or 70s. But no, it was music. The bands like The Clash, Sex Pistols, seeing how they... Actually, I might be telling a small lie. Billy Idol was my first fashion icon. The leather, the studs, the denim, the shocker blonde hair, white wedding. I can remember being about 12 and thinking that was a good look. But no, punk was really important for me, and then goth. Following bands like the Jesus and Mary chain and sort of taking on that kind of style.
So you weren't inspired by sort of, a lot of the people we interview in the series, they talk about their parents' style or the things that they saw when they were super small. It was more kind of celebrities that got you excited.
Yeah, it's music, it wasn't really what was going on at home. It was what's going on away from home that I wanted to escape through, and I think same for magazines, like discovering Interview magazine when I was 12 and looking at the pages of these scenes in New York, this kind of idea of Warhol's factory, this idea of art, music, fashion, colliding on the pages of this magazine, for me, made me realise that there was a world beyond the world that I was living, because my world was nothing like that. You know, I didn't have that kind of colour or that kind of, you know, creative melting pot around me. I grew up in a much more straight environment, so I was really attracted to that, but didn't know what it was, and kind of had to escape. Escape to get to it. But what it did is it made me realise the power of magazines. You know, it wasn't all in front of me. It wasn't growing up. I didn't grow up with kind of, you know, rock star parents where all of this stuff was going on around me. I grew up in a very different, much more straight environment. So the idea that a magazine could be a portal to another reality was really instilled at me at an early age.
It's interesting, you say the word escape a lot, and it feels like this idea of fashion is something that's aspirational and exciting and sort of cool is very important to you and is important to your titles. Do you think that that's right? Trying to create that idea of fashion as something that is slightly removed from the reader, but I guess in a good way. I don't mean in a lofty way, but in the sense that it's something that you want to be involved in, but you're not quite.
I think there's fashion and there's clothes. You know, it depends how you want to break down the terminology, but you know, I've always been attracted to and inspired by designers who treat clothes as ambassadors for ideas. So there's always a bigger, you know, psychological story going on that the clothes help express. And that excites me. Fashion as product, for me, is dull.
Talk to me a bit more about when you were growing up. You talked about, you know, discovering interview, reading magazines. What was the point that you started thinking about a career in publishing or journalism or fashion, or did you never quite get to that point?
I never thought of that word career. I never thought there was a career in it. I never operated in a career mindset. It's funny because, you know, in those times in the early 90s, the idea of, like, even people who in fashion or photography who were successful didn't really talk about the ad campaigns that they did. You know, it was kind of taboo to talk about that. You didn't want to advertise that you were doing commercial work. You wanted to be an artist. So you talked about all the non-commercial things you were doing. And, you know, the idea of doing that was kind of a counterintuitive. And that all changed. That all changed massively in the late 90s, heading into the 2000s. There was no more kind of division between those attitudes, if you like. But no, career was boring.
So if you weren't motivated by a career, you've talked about being motivated by this idea to escape. What did you want to achieve? Was it money? Was it being cool?
I wanted a family. You know, I wanted a family of like-minded souls who I wanted to belong to, you know, as part of a movement, as part of a like-minded group of people who had a kind of a higher purpose or a higher calling for what we were doing, and that was to, you know, shatter taboos, to do things with heart and soul and belief in changing, you know, the world around us. And it was super idealistic, but it's still a very strong part of me. The eye of photographers like Corinne Day, they were looking at beauty in a different way, they were looking at fashion in a different way. We're talking about references and ideas that weren't considered to be the norm, you know, but felt normal to all of us that were part of their journey. And the magazine kind of just picked up on all of that energy, you know. It was kind of the fanzine for that scene, if you like, and it took a couple of sort of fluke moments for it to transcend being a fanzine and hit into more mass or hit into popular culture.
And I want to talk about that period where you came to the city, because you seem to talk about that like it was very sort of integral to who you are as a guy now. You learnt more from your peers and your social life than from your classes then?
I met everyone in bars and clubs. I met everyone in the entire 90s in bars and clubs. I didn't go to meetings. You know, I mean, that's where everybody I met that collaborated with or did anything on Dazed, including all my staff, were recruited through bars and clubs, because they were the most interesting places for me, where music, fashion, art and video and film was coming together, and the level of experimentation was incredible. I mean, you'd go out one night and, you'd see Lee Bowery do a performance,
I want to pick up on something you said. I'm aware I'm pushing you on it, but you said, you talked about counterculture, and you said, I'm very proud of our independence. I guess what I'm asking is independence from what? Independence
from anybody telling us what to do. Do what the fuck we want to do. That's independence. It's that simple.
So you don't feel
if I want to put Twigs on my next cover, she goes on my cover because the teams think that's a good idea, and our independence allows me to give them the freedom to decide to do that, rather than me saying, do I think she's going to sell more? It means that we can be intuitive. We can make intuitive calls about what we think is relevant. We can be closer to our readers. We can listen to our readers. We can understand what interests them and reflect that in the magazine without having to, worry about the commercial implications of it beyond a certain point, because we're independent. We can follow our gut. I'm interested in what you think, maybe looking back, your biggest talent is, because it doesn't seem to me it is as a journalist or a writer. Is your talent spotting other talent? What are you good at? Maybe. I don't really know. I have no idea what my talents are. I try not to think about it too much and just, do whatever feels right at the time, and it's a mix of things, because obviously, done a lot of interviews, written a lot of text, worked with a lot of photographers, been involved in publishing, been involved in a lot of people's careers. So I don't know what it all adds up to. Is it visual? Is it text? Is it fashion? Is it not fashion? It's a bit of everything. I guess I'm a polymath in some ways, with a very curious mind who gets excited easily. And when I get excited easily, I throw myself into things, and I don't edit, and I just get on with it, and I don't give a fuck if I'm not good at something. I kind of feel that to be learned, or the academic aspect of something, is overrated, and can be a block. And all of my, a lot of my people that give me a kick are people who just done it themselves, and haven't given a fuck about validation, but just do it. So do you think education's overrated? Yeah. It's a lot of fun, and I think, the right education is a good thing, but for me, I didn't need it. I just got on with it. That's interesting to me, because I wonder now, when you're putting your staff together, do you hire people because you think that they're sort of talented and experienced, or because you think they're cool? All of it. But which is more important? Experience is least important. It's just the willingness, the aptitude, and the passion is the most important. Let's talk more about when you sort of decided to step down from being editor of Dazed, because I guess this goes back to what we were talking about before, in that period where you knew that it was time to hand it over to someone else who's more kind of maybe more involved in the scene that Dazed is talking about. Was it a difficult decision, or did it just feel supernatural? Didn't want to let it go, and it was like a baby, so it was like a very important part of my identity and my soul, and I was editing every word and every line, and looking at every fucking comma, and doing every headline, and doing every picture caption, and putting every issue together with the team. And so you're super in it, and to let go of that is hard. It's like you're trained to do, you've pushed yourself, and you've trained you to behave, to do that. And so stepping back was hard, but I realised I had to do it, that the magazine had to stay young, and that there were talented people coming through that I wanted to give a chance, and I wanted to start another magazine, which was called Another Magazine. And ran out of ideas that day. It was time to let go and step back and do less for Dazed on a day-to-day level, and it was hard. This is going to embarrass you, I think, but people often talk about you when stuff's written about you. It's a phrase that kept coming across when I was researching you. People be like, oh, he's the coolest man in Britain. Do you think you're cool? Go and fuck yourself. Why is that a bad question? Because the kind of thing like a tabloid journalist once interviewed me and asked me. Okay. But no, it's your question. So I I don't really understand what that label means, and it's no interest to me at all whether I am or I'm not, or what is and what isn't. I think what I'm attracted to in life, and where my eye turns to, and what my ears get excited about is not what's cool, but what has some kind of soul, or what has some kind of emotional depth, and what, you know, feels new. I think Kate is very, very cool, and you know, I guess my association with her, I got some of that.
You talked about when you were growing up, and this idea of kind of aspiring to something and escaping and getting into a world. I guess for your readers, they're trying to get into your world now, and I guess what I'm asking is, do you think that people should aspire to? Would you like to think your reader aspires to that?
Yeah, I think the world that I was escaping to was this family, was this extended family, was this idea of a group of people who shared a common vision of dissent and expressed it in their own colourful ways, and I felt I belonged in that collective mindset, in that group, and I still really see Dazed as a group, and I really still see it as a group of voices, and the different personalities within that. Some may be more, you know, social media, you know, friendly, some may be more quiet, some may be more, you know, but at the end of the day, their voices are all very, very strong in, you know, in the platforms that they're working on. And that's what's important for me, is that I think, if anything, I don't want the reader to aspire to one face that represents that magazine, but to aspire to the ethos that magazine has, and that is represented by a collective or group of individuals who they can know a little bit about, something about, but they don't have to hold them up as the one archetype of that magazine. And that's what's been so amazing about, you know, my journey with Dazed and going into another, is that I've had all of these amazing people to share that with, and who are as important as me in defining what that magazine is. So, you know, whether that is Katie England, Katie Grand, Rankin, Alistair Mackey, Phil Pointer, you know, Nicola Formanchetti, etc., etc. It's kind of like, it's a gang, you know? That's what I aspire to. That's what makes me feel excited and comfortable to belong to. And that's the kind of idea that I guess at its core is what I want the reader to aspire to and feel that they belong to, that kind of that kind of group mentality, that ethos. I really feel that together we're stronger than we are alone.